All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to POAP Citizens. This is where we get to meet some of the amazing citizens that make up the proof of attendance protocol community. And today, our guest is Helena from Salsa. Again, what's up, Helena?
All good, all good. Thank you so much for having me here today and for this chance to speak with probably my favorite community in Web3.
Oh, all right. Yeah, you're already saying the right things. Love to hear it. So I'll just apologize right away. I am on the road right now and I don't have my normal mic. So Helena, as well as the guests, you might get a little reverb and bounce from me. Apologize, but we will get to hear mostly Helena's beautiful voice. So that's kind of what we're optimizing for. Anyway, so yeah, excited to have you on today, Helena, and we're going to learn about your POAP story and the role that salsa plays within the ecosystem. And as we mentioned, we mentioned on Slack privately, but I try to make this show a little different than a lot of other audio events where instead of just trying to focus on salsa, I want to actually get to know you, the POAP citizen, because you have, I'm sure, an amazing backstory and a lot to talk about. And so I wanted to start with how was life growing up where you're from? Where are you from? And did you ever collect things as a kid?
Yeah, I absolutely love that question. I think one of the first things before I had this initial conversation with Patricio that kickstarted a lot of this journey was I watched his talk. I think it like Eat Latam or somewhere there, and he was talking about his experience of collecting things growing up. And I remember just sitting in front of my laptop, in front of YouTube, thinking to myself like, "Oh my gosh, I used to collect so many things as well." And so I'm originally Austrian. I grew up in Germany, though, in Munich, and I grew up in the countryside, just like half an hour outside of the city. And I was a very avid collector of many things. I think I started out collecting stamps when I was even small, like very, very small, could barely like write and wasn't in school yet. My mother was always working from home. She was an author and like a writer, and she would get a lot of post. And I just remember as a toddler always sitting next to her paper bin and then getting really excited when she would throw away like a letter that had a post stamp on it, because then I would collect that and I would like make stuff out of it. And so I think that was my first like really memorable experience of collecting things, was sitting next to the trash can, if that makes sense, and just collecting paper stamps. This joy of collecting really turned into like merged into my passion for nature as well later on. I would say from kind of the age of 6, and when I started going to school, I was fortunate to learn how to dive really early. So went scuba diving for the first time when I was just 7 years old, and this experience of breathing underwater like really changed my life. And I started collecting shells, lots of shells. I had a huge shell collection. I once tried to buy a candle for my mother in a normal store with my shell collection, because I believed it was so valuable that I could probably buy a normal dress or like a normal candle or like some decor object with it. And yeah, there's like a lot of attachment I have and to my collection there. I still have a lot of those shells, and it expanded into stones. So I've always been a pretty avid collector my entire life.
Wow, that was much cooler than and deeper than I really expected, and probably so far the best explanation of one of the POAP citizens who've collected. I mean, everyone has collected a little bit, but yours was quite unique. What I've noticed about people who grow up outside of cities, because I grew up in Los Angeles and San Diego, like very much in the city, and while I would spend time in the mountains or the beach, I feel like it's different than growing up kind of closer to nature just on a day-to-day basis. And I found that a lot of people who grow up in nature are able to appreciate some of the finer natural things a little more, and that was clearly reflected in your desire to collect seashells. And it's such an interesting story that you mentioned you tried to purchase something with those seashells, because it actually shows that even at an early age you kind of understood the value of not money in a sense, but just like value exchange. And I mean, there's a real world where exchanging some of these beautiful seashells, really should have been able to buy you whatever you wanted. And in Web3, we're all weirdos about exchanging different valuable items for other valuable items without using like USD. And so that's cool that you mentioned that. And I'm glad that you already you dived into diving. As I was doing a little research to try to learn about you before our interview, I did see that you got all the way to the dive master level, and I didn't actually know what that was. It just sounded like pretty high level. I was like, oh, dive master, and that's actually a pretty advanced tier. I think you have to do more than 50 dives or something like that. So maybe you can expand on that. I mean, not only did you start when you were young, but it sounds like you kept up at it for a little while.
Yeah, 100%. I actually, fun fact, I wanted to be a marine biologist for quite some time until we had a talk at school from someone who was a like normal biologist, not marine. And I realized that, just like talking to dolphins all day is not actually the job, but it's like sitting in a lab and testing things. And then my dream of becoming a marine biologist went away. But I was always extremely passionate about diving from that first moment when I was about 7 years old and experienced taking a breath underwater. And it was just so magical. I think another thing that I love about it is I'm generally a person who likes to speak a lot. And there's always so much going on. And when you're underwater, it's an hour of complete silence where you can't speak and no one else can speak. And it's actually pretty meditative. So I enjoy that too. I did do my dive master. I did that right out of school when I was 18. I think the rationing was a bit a mixture of just like being passionate and wanting to take this a bit further and being able to learn how to teach others as well and share this passion with other people. And taking beginners onto their first dive was probably one of the best experiences I've ever had because it's actually quite a scary thing. And you learn a lot about empathy as well and about how to make people feel comfortable. And you're really leading people through an experience that's completely new and something that they haven't done before. So that's something that I learned and got out of it. I think another reason of why I did it is in my mind, I was always like, okay, well, I envision all this career and whatever for myself, but I would just as much love living on a beach somewhere and just diving. And so if I already have the certification, then that option is always there and it's really close by. And so, maybe in a few years you'll find me at some beach just diving and teaching other people, but so far it hasn't happened. I went to that qualification and I have like, I don't know, something like 130 dives or something that I've done, but I've never actually worked professionally beyond my course teaching other people.
Very, very cool. Yeah, I have actually never dived, and the fact that you mentioned, you can't speak, and so it's like a meditative experience. I can just imagine how magical that can be for people once they get over that initial fear. I mean, you're underwater in this entirely new world, just really using your eyes. I'm not sure what sounds there would be in that case because you probably have earplugs, but yeah, it sounds like it can be really tranquil. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for digging in there. The next thing I found, well, so just to clarify, there actually wasn't a lot of information about you online, and normally I again like to dig in to find out who I'm talking about, and so there wasn't a ton of information, but I found a few things that, even though they were small quantities, I find them to be very, very unique and interesting. So the next one is you were somehow connected to the Deutsches Museum. And for the listeners, this is known as like the German Museum. It's in Munich, Germany, and it's actually the largest museum in the world for science and technology. Tell me how you're connected to this museum and anything else that comes to mind about it.
I really love that you managed to hunt down that detail in the little and few things that are out there on the web about me. I mean, I have a very special connection to that museum. It's actually, funnily enough, my great great grandfather who founded it, and he was an engineer, was technical, and he had this idea and this vision of building this huge museum where the world's like kind of artifacts of science and technology would be exhibited for everyone to see. And it's a huge collection. There's, I think, like something like 30,000 pieces that are exhibited, but it's something like 140,000 if you not, count the archive. So that's really collection on another level and scale and really kind of fits within, I think, the POAP theme of collecting valuable items. He was a very inspiring character as well, who managed to get all these items from, one of the first cars to airplanes. There's like almost everything in there, submarines, but also small particles and little, experiments or smaller version of bridges and then explanations around how they were built. And he managed to convince all these German industrial companies, at that time who were building those things to donate all of these artifacts. So in my mind, when we were fundraising for Salsa, I was actually channeling him because I know from, my family and my grandparents when they spoke about him that he was the master fundraiser and the master in convincing people to just give him all of these items for free. And he's definitely the person I channel when I go through that myself at work when I have to convince people about something. And the museum is so worth checking out if anyone's ever in Munich. There's sections around, yeah, almost everything, and it's full of collections about science and technology around the world. A lot of cars, a lot of airplanes. It's very, very cool. So I can highly recommend that to anyone who's into seeing big collections of things.
Yeah, that is way, way crazier than I expected. The information online was quite minimal. You were, looking at some artifacts on like a video, and I was like, oh, maybe she was connected to a donor, or I also found, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, if you ever acted in a role in Germany separately, and I was like, maybe she was like kind of an actor for this, but the fact that your I don't know, great grandpa or great great grandpa was the founder and the master fundraiser or collector who kind of got a lot of this together and got going is way more than I expected. So I think you probably have one of the best bloodlines in the POAP ecosystem now for being like a collector, and I think it makes a lot of sense. And so look forward to seeing you continue to channel that. And yeah, you guys do great work with Salsa, and we'll definitely get into that. But go Helena's grandpa, awesome.
You know
And
what? This is actually like the work I do there is they have a group of like young people who are like I would say like call it friends of the museum. And we get together to try and help the museum with certain topics. It's a really cool group of people who are in technology in different fields of science who live or have some connection to Germany. I don't know how big the POAP Germany community is, but if anyone's from Munich and is interested, this is something I'm so passionate chatting more about and would love to get you to one of the events because it's just a very quirky, cool, and interesting bunch of people there.
awesome. And I guess, selfishly, I have to ask is I feel like you might be the right person to help us get a POAP for the museum for visitors. Could we make this
Yeah.
happen in the next couple years?
We can 100% make this happen. This is an amazing idea. I don't know why I haven't thought about this yet, but we're going to make this happen. I mean, I've convinced my mother, who's an author, to start doing NFTs and print like QR codes to her collections in her actual books, like with German big publishers. So I feel like we can get the museum on board as well. And there's some very innovative people that are also like kind of members of the museum and want to support it. So let's get this going. I'm gonna make a mental note of mine now to try and convince them to get a pub out there.
Awesome. And the cool thing with POAP obviously is like, it could be one for like when you enter for guests, but it could also be more nuanced. Like, you have to find 10 of these unique artifacts around the museum, and each one of those is a POAP. The design space is so wide, and I really think it would just help people be more connected to some of the art pieces sometimes. A lot of people go to museums and they'll kind of walk through and glance around. Then other people will, really sit there and read the prompts or the information. And I feel like there could be a new breed of POAP farmers who would go there and they'll read it and they'll really enjoy the art, but they also will get the POAP, and it leaves a more lasting connection. So yeah, we'll go for that in the next year or two or something.
That have you had museums actually implementing POAP? Because I think it's exactly that, and that the museum, the Deutsches Museum, actually has always pioneered interactiveness. And so a lot of the exhibits are not just like you look at them, but you go inside of like some station that's supposed to be somewhere out there, like a NASA station, and you actually really feel how it is to be in space, or you interact with like a water pump. There's a lot of interactiveness there, so I feel like POAP would fit right in. I think we should like seriously get this going, and I'd be really curious to know if you've done this before with any museum in the world.
Yeah, I'm sure that there are museums that have done it. I don't know off the top of my head. And that's where POAP is so crazy, where I always say, POAP is now, 4+ years old, and it's grown like this in a good way, like a virus. And so POAP is actually in like all over the earth, and it's almost impossible to track everywhere it is. And so, internally at POAP Inc., we try to track a lot of these like notable drops or important POAPs, but it's so hard. And I think eventually there'll be multiple people whose like full-time jobs are like curate, like a special type of curator who is looking through to find these special different drops, and like museums could be one category. So what we'll probably just do here is we'll make the German museum the best execution of POAPs in museums, and then everyone else can follow along, and all thanks to your grandpa.
Love it. Let's do it.
Sweet. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that's university. And the reason why is university can be sometimes a pivotal moment in people's lives. They learn a lot. They sometimes, for the first time, get out of their comfort zone, or they move to a new city, etc. I see that you studied at the University College London, and it looks like you studied urban planning, design, and management with a focus on smart cities and future mobility. Um, Anything you wanted to share about the college experience? And I feel like studying smart cities and future mobility and kind of urban planning already kind of puts you ahead in the crypto scene, because in 2017 and 2018, a lot of people were talking about crypto and the impact of IoT and smart cities, and it was like this huge narrative, and there was like blockchains and projects dedicated to smart cities. Um, how was college? How do you think about smart cities? Whatever you want.
Awesome question. I love that you dig that up. Yeah, I mean, this was first of all a really random thing to study. I've met maybe three or so people in my lifetime who've also studied anything in the urban realm. It was something that I studied out of pure interest. I was really fascinated by the idea of like cities being these huge, complex systems, in a way, a bit like tech products, to be honest, where people and humans who in their own nature are really unpredictable are interacting with these cities and trying to plan them when like humans never behave that way that you would want them to is a huge challenge. And then I think on top of that, the angle of using technology to make cities greener, more sustainable, and more efficient, more livable, that was something that I found hugely exciting. And so that's why I studied urban design and urban planning. And I really loved my studies. I did know, however, that I did not want to end up as an urban planner. I knew that from the beginning of going in. And I was doing that in London. It was the first time that I lived in a huge city, which was just extremely inspiring and I would say eye-opening in terms of how much there's going on and how many different things I can get excited about and get involved in. I then went into the whole future mobility field deeper and deeper because by the time I graduated, it was really, when Uber just IPO'd and future mobility was such a hot topic. And compared to some of the other fields within the smart city realm that you just mentioned around the like IoT field or, smart real estate and all of that, that was still like very nascent and people were really slow to adopt anything. But when it came to transportation, people were innovating. And so I first joined like an incubator in Munich. Actually, I went back to Munich and all we did was think about, delivery bots and electrical helicopters that can air taxi you around from one city to another and things like the Boring Company. And that was really inspiring in terms of like challenging myself to think about what the future holds and how we could live in 10 and 15 and 20 years. But again, I really wanted to do something that is a bit more on the ground and doing something today and is a bit more proactive. So I actually then joined a German startup that was expanding to the US and moved to LA with them to kind of help them build that market. And they were in the future mobility space, but I was doing more BD and it was a company that was already, having a product on the ground, using technology to make cities greener, but not just thinking and planning for a future that, might take 10 or 15 or 20 years to come about.
That is very, very cool. And so I've started investing in new space recently, and that has kind of given me a new picture around how humans can move around in like space and time. And growing up in Los Angeles, and this is kind of speaking about like future mobility, right? Growing up in Los Angeles, we actually don't have great public transportation. And I was always wondering, for such a big city, why it was so kind of difficult to get around and you'd have to be stuck in traffic and the trains and the buses, like just wasn't great infrastructure. And then I would see, places like Japan and, I've traveled in Europe and I've traveled a lot now being older and seen these things. And it's so interesting how cities could be designed in ways to create much, much, much better mobility. But I feel like we haven't seen that much innovation in the U.S. on that in a long time. Just since you kind of studied it and spent a little time in there, do you feel like this will happen and it kind of just takes longer? Is this like a political issue? Is it a funding issue? Why haven't we seen the kind of infrastructure revolutionized in places like the U.S. to just make us be able to travel quicker? I know Elon Musk is going for it a little bit, but I mean, I still haven't seen much of that either.
Wow, this is such a good conversation and question as well. I think, let's stay with the example of LA. A huge issue is actually not just like willingness or culture of driving or all of that, but it's just looking at how LA is planned and how the city is kind of laid out. If you compare LA with, let's say, London or Vienna or any European city that has really good public transportation, those cities are way more dense. And so having like a subway station kind of makes sense because there's enough people who within 10 to 15 minutes walking can actually get there and take the subway and go somewhere. In LA, I feel like I kind of lived like, somewhere, in Venice, and it was still considered like central LA in that sense, like maybe not downtown, but central enough was part of the city. It was the houses, like, and I think if you think about Europe, like having a house, that really doesn't happen in anywhere around the central city. That maybe happens in the suburb, or if you're very, very lucky. Normally, you're in a flat in something that's a bit more high rise. And I think the density is really a thing that's easy to underestimate. And people tend to just focus on, yeah, the cultural aspect of like, okay, Americans love driving, but they also love driving because it's really convenient and because there's actually, you're not going to walk 30 minutes to a subway station if you can just have a car and if that's cheap. And so I think it's a combination of all these factors, but I think especially in cities like LA, a huge issue is how they're laid out and how spread out they are and how all the, city center is like there isn't really as much of a city center than in a European city. And so you have to go to so many different places within a spot, and building a transportation network for that is pretty expensive because of that. Then again, I've been out of the field for a while, so I'm sure there's more up-to-date thinking by now around why American cities haven't seen the transport revolution yet that we see elsewhere.
Awesome. That's a really good perspective still, because it's you have enough nuanced thoughts on it where that was kind of just a blind spot I haven't even thought of. And so people who spend some time in the space, it's like my question's like very basic and could easily be answered. But to outsiders, it's like, oh, why don't we have this magical transportation in LA? And it's, there's really good reasons why. Awesome. Love the convo here. To just for the sake of time, I'm going to move on to the next section. And I noticed you're kind of like myself. When I was younger, I ran quite a few different entrepreneurial ventures. And in 2020, it looks like you started one of your first ones. You might have done a lot more before, but it's hard to track them all down. And this was with Ace Interviews. When I was younger, again, I did small businesses and then I came out of college and I saw the need to be able to execute well at interviews, present well, and just, people getting out of college often don't know clear next steps. And so maybe you can talk about ACE interviews a little bit. Online it read that you guys were revolutionizing the way job seekers prepare for demanding job interviews, and you were also building a community at the same time. Again, with startups, pivots happen, and not everything goes to fruition. But tell me what inspired you to originally start that, and yeah.
Yeah. I think Ace was actually my second startup, if I put it into total quotation marks. My first business was a jewelry business when I was a teenager. I was just making jewelry and selling it. Some of it embellished with those shells that I was collecting and stones. But yeah, to come back to Ace interviews, the story behind that was really that I was in LA working in BD for that future mobility company. And I saw that there is this job that existed, which was called a product manager. And I didn't even know what that was. I, didn't study anything technical, didn't have that many friends who were engineers. But I was working with that person and suddenly got obsessed with this idea of becoming a product manager. And I figured out that I actually had a friend who was a product manager, my only friend who was one. And he was a product manager at Google. And they have this program for young computer science graduates to join this like very selective program and become like amazing product managers. And in my mind, I was like, amazing, I'm gonna do that. I was super naive because I didn't have the graduate degree that was necessary for that. I didn't actually study computer science. But I was convinced that I'm gonna get this job and network my way into it and just like convince him that I'm gonna be amazing, even if I'm not an engineer. And so I learned how to code, but of course it wasn't like as much as a computer science degree. And then started interviewing with them, and I did get, that first interview and did I think it was like 7, 8 rounds. It was a lot of interviewing, took a lot of time. And so I saw this problem firsthand of interviewing just being a skill that you can practice. It's really something that you can get amazing at if you put the time and effort into it. But the time and effort is not just sitting in front of a computer doing it alone. It's connecting with other people and practicing like in real life scenarios. So I had this idea of building a platform where two people preparing for similar jobs could get matched based on like their interests and based on like what type of jobs they're going for. And then they could practice for those job interviews together and improve together. And that's what I built there. I then ended up becoming a PM at a different company. It didn't work out at Google, unfortunately. And wanted to keep the company going, but it was just too hard to build that startup and learn how to be a PM at the same time. I also realized then what it means to build something that's like a big market size or a small market size. And with Ace interviews was it's certainly a problem that exists. The market size was really small because there's only so many job interviews that you can do where you would practice like, over a couple of weeks in order to get that job. Most other people who are trying to get a job, they sit down for 4 hours, read about the company, practice their pitch once, and they do the interview. And only for a select few, like management consulting, some banking jobs, and then product management at some big tech companies, people would really invest that time. And so my market size was also a bit too small to really build a sustainable business there.
Wonderful, wonderful. To take a step back, your first, I guess, entrepreneurial venture is the jewelry with the shells. Do you still have any of this? Do you wear any of it? Like,
Of
where is
course.
all your beautiful jewelry?
I still have a lot of it. Too much, probably. I still have all the tools as well, and like basically an entire cupboard full of stones and pearls and whatever. I do wear it sometimes, and my mother wears it too often, I would say. It was this classic like supportive mother scenario where they keep on wrapping your clothes or your jewelry that you make and design, and even the stuff that's probably not that in fashion anymore, she's still representing. So that's really sweet of her.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's a good mom. I my grandfather was a jeweler for a while, so I've always been interested in jewelry. And anytime I meet someone who's made jewelry, it requires like focus, and even if it's at like a low level or a high level, it like really is like a nuanced thing. So it shows that at a young age or whenever you were doing it, it probably helped you develop more like attention and like like a very tactical execution of things, etc. So that's cool. Moving forward, yeah. Sorry, what was that?
I love that your grandfather did that. At some point, we have to chat more of this about this in a spin-off
Of
of.
course. Yeah, whenever we meet people on POAP Citizens, we get to know that there's so many amazing humans out there, and we could probably spend a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. But I gotta get to the POAP stuff pretty soon here. And on the the fact that you X years ago didn't know what a product manager was, and now X years later, you have accelerated your learning so much that you have an amazing understanding of product. And we've talked internally, and I've seen it on different times in Slack that like you understand user flows and growth loops and all these different things that a really like more senior person understands. It goes to show just how much someone can accelerate their learning. And I still have friends who would love to use something like ACE interviews because they got out of college 1 to 4 years ago, and they're still struggling to find their place in the world. And having a community that you can really again practice those interview skills and learn different things is really valuable. So while it wasn't a big enough market or it wasn't a good fit, it looks like that it still is a great idea, and hopefully someone else is executing on that kind of small market. And yeah. Let's move on. Finally, salsa. Okay, guys. I know that we have just been getting warmed up here, so we're going to put on our dancing shoes. Congratulations, Helena, on your 1 year anniversary at Salsa. Uh, for
Wow.
those that aren't aware, tell everyone about Salsa. What's the vision? What's up, girl?
I did not realize it was a year. I mean, I feel like I've spoken about this with my co-founder Grace, but then, it hits you differently when someone else says it that it's been a year. That is very exciting. Yeah, let me quickly give a brief overview of what Salsa actually is and what we're building there. So at its core, Salsa is kind of a Web3 messaging app, but also a social app that uses on-chain data, such as POAPs or other NFTs, to help people build better relationships. And I'm using the term relationship in the most broadest sense possible. So this could be, two people connecting about a job opportunity, or it could be a brand engaging their audience, or a creator communicating with their most diehard fans who actually, showed up to a concert.
That is amazing. And it really is something that is missing in it's the Web3 stack, but it's going to eventually scale into like Web2. It's just going to be like technology. So I'm glad someone finally is making it. I'm also glad that you're really aligned with POAP because we've kind of needed something like this in the POAP ecosystem. And we'll get into one of the recent activations you've done, and that, yeah, it's just like such a wonderful product and tool that, selfishly on the POAP side, like, man, our community really needs something like this. But outside of POAP, you still have such a big market, and it's really like you are enabling more human connection, and it's so synergistic with POAP because we love human connection and memory preservation. So it's wonderful. Salsa was founded by the powerhouse that is you and Grace. I definitely want to have her on in the future. She's probably like one of the fastest shippers of dev work that I've ever seen. Like she's a legend. How did you two meet, and maybe what's like kind of the origin story there between you two?
Yeah, so okay, first of all, 100%, this is so true. Grace is a absolute powerhouse, such a talented engineer, and I have never met someone who ships like she does. The way that we met is a very interesting story. So it was in Miami at a hackathon. I was actually sitting on the floor. I really remember this moment. She was sitting on like a sofa, like close by. And back then, I mentioned before that my mother is an author, and I was working on an NFT book project with her. And I overheard Grace talking to someone else about NFT books. And, today that's already a pretty random topic. Back then, over a year ago, that was a very random topic. Like no one was talking or writing about the NFT book market. And so I turned around and we started chatting and, discussing what we were working on. And it turned out that she was actually trying out a different potential co-founder, and they were working on an NFT book project together. And we really got on and went for dinner and met up another time, another day. But then I kind of had to go back to Austria to see my family. And we said like, hey, this could work. We really had this feeling that we have very complementary skill sets. We believe in similar problems that we want to solve here in Web3. And we had really aligned values around why do we even want to build a company, passion and excitement levels and all of that. And she made this amazing proposal that we should try work together on a contained miniature project. And I'm going to mention exactly what it was, although this goes into a bit of detail because it's kind of reminds me of POAP in a way. And so she actually came to Austria all the way from San Francisco to work on this miniature project with me. We spent 2 weeks locked in a mountain cabin without having had dinner more than twice. So we really didn't know each other. My family was like, Helena, are you absolutely crazy now? Inviting someone into the house for 2 weeks to stay with you when you barely know them. And she probably thought she was going crazy too. So that's kind of how all of that started. And then what we were building was a way to send someone an NFT, like basically a shout out, a kudos, as an NFT via email. So you can just send it to someone. It would be like shout out for being like an awesome person. And then that person could claim it. And only after they had this whole moment of like, oh, my friend sent me something cool. I see the cool visual. I feel appreciated. That's when we told them, like, by the way, to actually mint this as an NFT, you should get a wallet and here's how you do it. And so our idea was like to test whether we could onboard new people into Web3 by doing a few things differently. A, making it totally non-financial, like you don't have to, load money into a wallet as a first step of onboarding into the space. But also B, you're not alone. There's a friend there with you from moment zero of interacting with Web3 who is actually sharing something with you. And, these like kudos things, people use POAP for that today sometimes, where it's like, hey, here's a kudos for finishing something really special, or here's a memory for this talk you gave where you did awesome. And so I think in actual fact, our very first steps in Web3 were somewhat already pretty aligned with what you guys are doing at POAP, which is just awesome.
That is such a great story. I think kudos are quite similar to POAP in certain ways, and I'm glad to see that you guys took the leap of faith to get together, get into a cabin, and just kind of jam it out to see if you guys were compatible. I feel like those are in life when people take those risks. Sometimes you have kind of the most amazing experiences and unexpected changes to your life that can live with you forever and even change the trajectory of kind of your life or your career. I guess my question there is when NFT book is like, what happened to this? Like, did your mom end up making one? Where's the salsa book? Like, what's up?
Um, Such a timely question because my mother's actually with me in London at the moment. And after Grace and I started working together, I was not being the greatest daughter because I was so busy building Salsa that I kind of really dropped the ball on, our NFT book project. But she got hooked and she was like, no, no, I want to do Web3 now. Like I'm an author. I've published like 15 books in my lifetime. I'm like a best-selling author in Germany, but I'm going to do Web3, although I'm like 56 and can barely use my laptop kind of thing. And she got together with a friend of hers who writes like similar kind of books. And they actually started a company that's called bookbridge.xyz. And they just released their very first, NFT small collection. Like it's like, I think 15 pieces or a bit more, where they collaborated with artists. And it's all around those two books that they've written, one about Picasso and one about Tanzania, and like that one has like a sustainability project behind it. So yeah, I mean that really happened, but I can't take any credit for it anymore because they did it alone and they just yeah, they're like these two 50-plus-year-old women who actually started doing NFT books.
That is wonderful. So bookbridge.xyz, everyone, go check it out. I'll definitely check it out later. And it's easy to feel like you mentioned that you were kind of being a bad daughter for a while. I feel like a lot of people might feel like that with their families, how when it's finally time for us to give less attention to our parents because we're focusing on certain areas of our life. I think it's a sign of a really good person who feels like they are letting their parents down, because the fact that you have that concern shows that you're probably actually not, and it's kind of you really want to serve them and love them, and it's the people who don't feel like they're missing their parents are the ones who kind of probably need to miss their parents and go see them. So wonderful, glad to see that book get shipped, and it makes sense. Salsa is a big project, so yeah, I mean, it takes a lot of time.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that. I think it was mainly also because Web3 is a scary space for someone who doesn't have a background in technology, doesn't know anyone in the industry. And I've then, me pulling back so much and not being able to guide them through launching this NFT project like as much as I would have wanted to. I'm so proud that they did it in the end and they just pulled it off without me. But at the same time, I know that that was a huge task for them. But yeah, Salsa, building Salsa really gets more intense every day because now that we have these integrations with you guys, we just integrated with IYK as well, and we get more and more users into the Salsa ecosystem and into our app. That's when the demands start ramping up as well. And suddenly it's not just our own internal aggressive timelines from Grace and I, which were always aggressive, but suddenly there's like external pressure as well around when you need to ship something and what event deadline there is. And so things have definitely intensified over time, but I I'm so happy that I can say this, but I love every moment of it, of building this company.
Awesome. And I love how, in Web 2, there's sometimes not a ton of collaboration across projects or products, and people only integrate when it's like really, really, really a need. And sometimes people, they will build instead of partner, et cetera. And I love that you guys have embraced the like partner aspect where you're building a great product and your product needs great partners and it helps you guys scale, hit new markets, get the user adoption that you want. And partnering with people like POAP and 90cc and IYK is, I feel like you are in the right place. And I don't know if the word is like politically, but like you're with the right players who I feel have the next like 5-10 years on lock when it comes to 90cc and like culture, IYK and like hardware, IRL, UX. POAP with like we're gonna continue to be all over everywhere, what's good, and like Salsa is the next one to be there in the mix. And I just love how you guys are like executing the partner playbook. And yeah, it does require more overhead for you to manage though, for sure.
100%. I think this almost like culturally, this willingness to partner, but then also from a technological standpoint, the composability in Web3 is really what makes it exciting to build here. Because for us, for example, our integration with POAP is like on multiple levels. On the most base layer, we're using POAP as a data source to help people figure out why they should even want to message with another person. Like, why would you want to message me? And maybe if you see that we both went to 3 of the same events in the past couple of years, that we both are part of similar communities that are quite small, so maybe we've even met in person but didn't realize. Those are the type of data points that really make it interesting to use wallet native messaging, which is what we're building. And I think this composability, the fact that we could just start building this pretty permissionlessly and can pull in different data sources from on-chain data really easily. That's what makes building in Web3 a lot of fun and very special. And I think that's also where ultimately we're creating totally new user experiences. Because if I think about Web2, more social apps, messaging as well, you're always so contained in the data of your own ecosystem. If you're on Instagram, you can see, whatever links people put in their Instagram profile, you can see who follows who, but that's about it. But you won't be able to see data from, let's say, Eventbrite or Ticketmaster in there in terms of what events has this person gone to and did you maybe go to the same concert last week. And I think that's really where protocols like POAP and other companies are building the building blocks, love that, for people like us to build completely new experiences for users.
I'm glad you called out composability there because when I first got involved in Ethereum in 2017, that was actually like one of the first things I wrote about. And one of the main aha moment for me was like, no longer do we have to have these kind of closed competitive silos, but actually embracing composability and like open networks and this like mishmash of essentially like products working with each other creates just so much new amazing things. And so tell me a little bit about the activation you did with 90cc. There was a NYC scavenger hunt. I unfortunately wasn't in New York City, so I missed out, but I did get to see a lot of the FOMO on Twitter. What was that activation? How did Salsa play a part? And were you
Yeah, that
happy with
was
the
really
outcome?
exciting. I'm actually super curious if anyone who's listening right now was in New York and maybe took part in the treasure hunt because POAP played a huge role there. First of all, kind of what 90cc was doing. And for anyone who doesn't know, 90cc is a fashion brand founded by G Money, and it's all about connected fashion. And they chip items, fashion items with NFC chips. People can then claim the digital twin of their product, but they can also keep track of who they're meeting in the real world through exchanging POAPs. And suddenly you have this huge graph of like, these are the 100 shirts that were in New York, and this is all the people who interacted and met those t-shirts, which is really novel and cool. And what they were doing in New York was a treasure hunt across the city where they were giving out a lot of products, but then they also had stops across New York, at like a cool pizza restaurant, at a cool taco spot, at a bar, at a gallery, where people would go there, claim the POAP that proves that they actually went to visit that spot, learn more about New York kind of from the lens of 90cc and what 90cc thinks is hot in New York. And then ultimately also participate to win some really great prizes. The most desirable one, which was a Chromie squiggle. And the role that Salsa played in that entire activation is, I said before that we're all around using on-chain data to help people connect. And so we powered the group chat for anyone who interacted with any of these like 90cc POAPs during NFT NYC, whether that's through meeting a person with like a t-shirt or a cap, or whether it was through claiming a POAP at one of the locations. And what these people were able to do then was come into Salsa, join the group's chat where, first of all, the entire discussion was happening very real time around, oh, I'm heading to this spot, G Money is there right now. There's a lot going on, people should come. But also, you could suddenly click on anyone's profile within the community, see what you have in common with them. For example, did they also go to the 90cc event in Miami last year? Or are they part of some other community and collected a POAP for it, where they're at the launch of some company or whatever else? And you can then create these interconnections within the community. So this was really when we were speaking to Jimani about this and about doing this. This was the thing that he found the most exciting as well, is that it's not just top-down communication from the brand to the audience, but there's interconnection between the members of the audience that's enabled in a totally novel way. When I'm in Discord, I can see the links of someone, right? I can put my Twitter link in there and the company I work at, but it's kind of shallow. If I could see what I share in common on chain with all of these people here in the room right now, I'm pretty sure there would be people here that I have so much to talk to about, and it gives us this conversation starter. And so that's what we did in New York. It was a huge success in the sense of how many people were really engaging in Salsa and the quality of conversation. There was around more than 200 people in that group. I think ultimately we did expect there to be more people in New York overall at the NFT NYC and especially also at the treasure hunt. We ran some data on that, on like how many POAPs were minted last year at NFT NYC. And it sounds like from our data, that's obviously not foolproof, but roughly 15,000 POAPs were minted last year, like unique holders of POAPs. And then this year was only less than 3,000. So there's definitely been a difference in terms of how many people were participating in New York overall. But yeah, so I think there were some pros and cons around the experience. We learned a lot, but ultimately it was really amazing to enable such a cool brand and such a cool community to create deeper connections with each other.
Awesome. That gives people a lot more understanding of how salsa can play, because like when we're talking about like the vision and like the idea behind it, sometimes people are not able to make the connection, but getting into that exact activation or event that happened makes it so much more relatable. And there's kind of three things I guess that I'll briefly cover. Is like, it's unfortunate that because the NFT crypto hype cycle has temporarily ended, and don't worry guys, a new hype cycle is coming in probably in the next couple years, that we saw so much less activity. And it's great that you pulled that data, because 13,000 POAPs versus, I don't know what you said, like less than 5,000. It really shows that it really is like a narrative and a hype cycle thing, because POAP has grown so much more since, in terms of like real user adoption and interest and demand, that it really was like, the hype cycle died, and that's what happens sometimes. I love that you mentioned the second point. I love that you mentioned it was providing like real time chat or real time experience. I could see in certain circumstances a scavenger hunt, like you might need to like literally be in that chat if you want to make sure you can like know what's going on. Someone's like, oh, I discovered something on Fifth Avenue in here, and everyone like FOMO runs over there. And like that, it would not be possible really without Salsa in that context, especially because it allowed everyone to be in a single chat. You didn't have to do like a weird Telegram or Discord thing. That's awesome. And then the third thing is and this is kind of the biggest part is you mentioned what is like everyone has been talking about digital identity for I mean 5 7 years in crypto at this point. And the what you provided there at 90cc was like a version of digital identity. As you mentioned, it wasn't just like your Discord handle or your Twitter handle. It was like who have you met? Where have you been? What experiences have you had? And all of this can come from like lush POAP data, which is still hard. POAP data is still kind of hard to work with and will get better over time. But I'm so glad that you guys provided this true DID experience, which everyone's been talking about, but you guys like made it happen for this activation for real, for real.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that for me, like POAP is such an amazing decentralized identity solution because it tells us so much, right? It's not just like, oh, this is your user handle, but it tells me what communities you like, what brands you like, who you engage with, where you've been in person, and all of that whilst preserving anonymity as well. So that's really cool. I think if I think about also, looking forward, how we're going to replicate what we've just done with 90cc, there's really concretely a use case of like POA plus Salsa that I'm so excited about that I just want to share with the community as well to perhaps get some feedback or, chat with anyone who knows more about that space. But it's basically replicating this for musicians. Because if I think about a musician today, they have their community on Twitter, maybe on Discord, maybe on Instagram. But if I would ask them, can you point me towards just 10 profiles of people who actually went to your concert in Miami last week? That would be really hard to do. On Instagram, there's like literally no way that you can single out those fans who've physically been there, who showed up from everyone else. And if you switch that around from a friend's perspective, if you're a super fan from someone and have collected all of their, let's say, merch and you've been to all of their events, you still get treated exactly the same way than anyone else who might just follow the Instagram account because they listen to one song of them. And what we're interested in enabling next is letting people spin up groups on Salsa for engaging people who've actually physically been to the event and who might want to, buy the early release of a song that was played there or just engage further with the artist. And I think that's really where you can see this power of POAP, of like proving where someone has been, how they've engaged with someone, really level up the career of people in the creative worlds, because this is just something that today doesn't work, and it's enabled by having that data and then being able to message on top of that. So I agree on like all your points around decentralized identity and how POAP enables that in an extremely unique way.
Yeah, that is a perfect use case for artists, and it can work in a lot of different industries. I mean, even some brands would want that, but I had never thought about that. Like, there really is no way to see your fans' profiles and who they are with like real attribution if they've been to your event, if they bought merch, and it provides such a different dynamic. And it, as you mentioned, can allow artists or creators or brands to be able to give more love or benefits to the real supporters as opposed to maybe again just someone who clicked follow on Instagram. Like, quantitatively and qualitatively, someone who's been to 4 concerts and bought in 2 sweatshirts is so different than someone who just clicked follow on Instagram. And right now there is no way for brands and creators to see this kind of like fan profile, real attribution. And I would love to see that come to life. We are short on time, so there's a couple questions people had that I'll ask one or two of them here, and then yeah, we'll just keep rolling. So, is there a specific event or moment between you and Grace that actually sparked the idea for creating Salsa?
Such a great question. I think there was multiple moments. And I think we also both, when we started working together, had our own unique perspectives about that issue and had our own experiences with it. So Grace, just before we met, she was actually helping this kind of Web3 entertainment company in New York called Mad Realities with their, building the website and the minting page and everything. And Mad Realities was launching pretty expensive NFTs that people could buy to then vote on the reality TV show and like who should date who next and stuff like that. And they had a real issue where people were buying the NFT, but then half of them didn't join the Discord. And of the half that joined Discord, a lot of them dropped off. And so in the end, there were all these people who spent like thousands of dollars on this NFT, but the brand couldn't engage them anymore and couldn't get them to actually take the action and vote. And so, from Grace's perspective, she was like, wow, this is just really crazy that there isn't a way to, message between wallets and engage your audience that way. The way that I came to that, or the angle that I came with, was more from my experience of growing up in a creative household, because what I just described with a musician really goes for authors as well. So my mother has written 15 books in her lifetime, but she has zero idea who her readers are. And there's no way she can actually directly engage them. She can post on Twitter, she can post on Instagram, on Facebook, but that will just go out to like her general followership. She knows that there's people who've literally read every single book of hers since she was like, in her 20s herself, starting her career. Because those people sometimes write her literally like a physical letter or an email, or they contact her publisher to get in touch with her. But there's no way to do that at scale where you're like, okay, I'm gonna do a group chat with only people who've actually read my last book, and I'm gonna do a Q&A with them and see what they have questions about. Or I'm only going to do it for people who've read like 3 or more of mine, and we're actually going to do whatever. She does historical books, so we're going to go on a tour of Prague or something else. That really doesn't work. And so for me, I came more at the problem from a lens of like, how does this work even without Web3, like in the normal world? And why does owning your data and then messaging where that data sits create a completely new experience? So we both had these perspectives. And when we were in Austria building more this like kudos project, every dinner, we had so many lunches and dinners together, because this is a tiny village where there was basically no people around us. It was just us two, had a lot of time to kill. And so we spoke about like all these different things we see in Web3. And that was a moment there at dinner where we just started sharing how big of a communication issue there is in the space. And we, kept talking about it, and it kept coming up. And that's how we ultimately decided that this is the space we want to build in.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, you definitely are solving a real problem, and the fact that you've seen it with your own mom, and and the other potential writers, etc. And I've had so many brands and communities ask us, months ago, or whatever, before Salsa was really around. It was like, hey, we need to get back in touch with our collectors. How do we do that? And there really wasn't a great way. I mean, there was some clunky ways, but Salsa is just like a whole nother level. And it also provides the profile aspect. So not just the chat, but it can provide more and more data, potentially over time, which is so great. So we're short for time. Maybe if you want to share anything that might be upcoming in the next year for Salsa that you're excited about, maybe features or just things that people should look out for, whether it's like lightly touching on your roadmap or just like even just visionary stuff, maybe what you hope to do, anything.
Yeah. Oh gosh, there's so many exciting things coming in. For anyone who's in our community, you guys know that we ship fast and ship a lot. So the roadmap also constantly changes. A few things I'm especially excited about is like launching more and more groups, and our groups are going to get better and better. So we're doing, messaging improvements such as reactions and responses, but also ways to see, what POAP you actually need to hold in order to unlock a group and get more data insights into that. We're also doing a very cool thing where we're going to launch NFT referrals. So whoever comes into Salsa in the future will be able to share free NFTs with like 3 friends as a referral program to bring them into Salsa as well. And, that social network of like who you referred, who your friends are, will then be visible in Salsa, but also obviously on chain. And so we're really excited to try that one out too. And then I would say, lastly, a big priority for us is just making it easier for people who don't know that much about Web3 yet to use Salsa and join in on the experience. The problem that I described before with the, musician who wants to engage people who actually went to their concert, that's a universal problem where you don't need to believe into Web3 or believe into decentralization in order to want to use a product that solves this. And so we want to make sure that we can create an experience that's as simple as possible, and where there isn't so much of a steep learning curve involved in order to kind of join in and start talking. That's definitely a bit more long term, and we're figuring out different ways of doing that. I think POAP, is really a market leader in making a product that's accessible by all, and where we're not excluding people who haven't been in Web3 for years.
Very exciting. And it sounds like you can take some product inspiration from other existing Web2 products, but also you're like inventing and creating kind of net new things. And so I look forward to it. I mean, yeah, you guys ship fast and you're always like just iterating, so it's wonderful. I'll ask you kind of a final question, and it goes back to just kind of more about you as a person. If you could visit any point in history and see any event or meet any person through all of history, what would that be? Who would it be, or where would it be?
Oh my gosh, this is so hard. There's like a bazillion actual things that I would have loved to see. I think in the end it must have been like traveling to old Egypt and just seeing like some of the rituals that were going on there. I think that's the mythology there and all the stories that you read as a kid. That's always something that really inspired me, and I think they were so beyond their time in terms of what they knew about science even. So I think that would be probably where I would travel to and specifically who I would meet. I mean, probably would have to be someone like Cleopatra then. So I'll go with that answer.
That is wonderful. Yeah, I would say that whenever I look at the pyramids or kind of look at old Egypt, I just wish that there was a way to transport back and see it in its heyday. I mean, so much more color, so much more amazing gems and metals and gold. And I even heard that there was like a crazy event that happened there where there was like, the Pharaoh battled against this guy named Moses and they did all this crazy stuff. Yeah, they talk about it in certain parts of history. But love it. Love chatting with you. I'm sure I'll see you around and we'll continue to enjoy the wonderful world that is salsa, and we'll get Grace on in the future. Where can people find you? Just if you wanted to share any final words and any way that they could hit you up or get started if they want to start tinkering.
Yeah, 100%. So the best way to reach me is obviously on Salsa. To download Salsa, just go to salsa.me. Very easy, salsa.me. And there's a download button there. Our app is available on iOS and on Android. And once you're in, you can either just say hi on the feed and I'll make sure to drop you a DM, or you can message me directly. I'm helena.g.eth. And so just like my Discord handle with .eth at the back of it. And I'm always checking Salsa and always down to chat. You can also still join the 90cc group there to just check out how group chats look on Salsa and how that feels. And would love to hear anyone's feedback. My Twitter is there as well, I think, in my Discord profile, and I'm happy to receive messages almost anywhere. But I'm definitely most responsive on Salsa.
Awesome. Awesome. It was wonderful getting to know you. Thank you, everyone, for coming. And man, thank you so much. So, how do you actually pronounce your name properly? Because I feel like sometimes I say Helena, sometimes I say something else. What is the exact correct pronunciation?
Um, I mean, first of all, it really doesn't matter. I'm I go with anything, and I feel like it still addresses me. Technically, the correct pronunciation that I grew up with is Helena, but I think Helena is a more American way of saying it, and I've heard that a lot. Sometimes I get Helena, but yeah, really, I'm cool with all of them.
All right, Helena. Well, you are wonderful. Thank you. Have a great day, and we'll see everyone in general in a few minutes.